You're listening to Murder Not Murdering with Erin,
And Autumn,
a true crime podcast about murder and murdering.
but we are not murderers.
Welcome back to Murder Not Murdering with Erin, and
Autumn,
that's her.
the fall season queen.
That is a title you also gave yourself.
So doesn't mean it's not a good title or that it's not real.
Well, we got to experience some real fall season weather on Saturday when we went to go visit baby Highland cows.
It was a lot of fun
It
and very
was.
rainy.
It was very rainy. They were some wet cows. And we did that at Lucky Farms. It was really cute and the people were really nice. So 10 out of 10 recommend.
And you get to actually pet baby Highland cows.
They were like 7 months old and so cute.
Already 300 pounds,
Yeah, as a baby.
which is wild, but
It's
extra
crazy.
cute. Extra, extra cute.
And I went to the zoo today and it's sunny out, but really cold.
Yeah, it is very chilly. Today is the first day that I wanted to turn on the heat.
Yeah, my heat's been on, but I busted out my winter coat today to walk around because it was in the 40s when I got there.
That's fun.
Freezing cold. I mean, not freezing, but it's cold
It's
as
better
heck.
than really hot though, because I went a
A
couple
million
weeks
times
ago
over.
and it was very warm. I was dying.
Yeah, I don't like it when it's too warm. Also, it's uncomfortable with the animals. Today, they were all super active and they have a new wolf pack. So that was cool to see them. And we actually saw they have new porcupines, African porcupines, and a bunch of other things.
I have a
So it was pretty cool.
porcupine in my yard.
I know. This one's a little bit different than that one, but I've seen yours and it's awful cute.
Yes, I don't go near it. Dustin assures me that they don't actually like propel the needles.
Quills.
You have to like be in contact with them. But you know what? I'm not taking any chances.
I wouldn't try it. I wouldn't
So I
poke
stay
the
far
porcupine.
away.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
fair.
stay far away. He loves to go take pictures and get as close as possible, but no one ever said he was that bright, so
I mean, when is he gonna bring it in the house and have a name for
I
it?
mean, honestly, he loves any and every animal. He's an elevator mechanic, so sometimes he goes into people's homes and that he doesn't remember like job site names or the clients' names. He remembers their pets and their pets' names. And he takes pictures and will send me pictures of his new friends. And that's all he'll talk about. And then I told Erin this. And at the table when we were having lunch, he started showing pictures of the animals he met that week to Lucy.
And the porcupine.
And the porcupine.
So, I've seen that now.
Yes, you're blessed to see all those animals that you'll never know, but mean a lot to him.
Yeah, but it was a really good time. We've had a lot of fun times lately, and we actually got to see each other in person, which is nice, since we
Mhm.
always record when we are separate.
Yes, we record remotely, which also blows a lot of people's minds.
I
They
mean,
always ask me a lot of people actually ask me if we
for
record in the
video.
vault.
Oh,
No, they ask if we record in the vault. I'm like, "We
that
only
was a
did that one
one-time
time."
thing, yeah.
And
No,
I told them, I'm like, "I would prefer not to go back in there if I'm being honest."
I go in there all the time
I'm sure you do, but it was just very
because it's now an arcade.
eerie.
Well, now it's all occupied. The whole place is an arcade and vintage games and pinballs and everything. So it's a lot less eerie because there's actual people in there.
That is kinda like a Friday Night at Freddy's.
Yeah, just a good time.
It's a great time.
Hmm.
If you like vintage games, check it out.
If you like vintage games and you live in the Seattle area, head on down to the Southgate Arcade. Whoop whoop.
Please do.
Yeah, that was my commercial.
Woot woot.
Another word from our sponsor, Southgate Arcade.
Oh, what a lovely sponsor those people
Mhm.
are.
They're so nice. They pay us so much money to make our podcast.
The most money in the world.
Oh, if only. But this
One
is why
day.
you should share with your friends.
Yes, please share.
I hope you all are enjoying our Halloween episodes because I've been loving them and I loved the last one. It was really fun looking up the pictures because I'd seen pictures from the hospital that you did last week. I mean, like, no matter what you do, it always looks creepy.
Mhm.
Like, it's
Always.
abandoned, so but, like, abandoned with gurneys, like, around and stuff, it looks so
Mhm.
creepy.
So creepy.
And I'm doing a ghost story this week.
Ooh. My
Yeah.
story is not Halloween themed this time.
What the hell, Autumn?
I know. I have a good one for next week, though. That is. This one is kind of around the time, like the time frame
Okay.
of
I'm
October, but
yeah.
not October. Not a ghost story.
Anyways, I am going to make sure all of my cases in the month of October are spooky or creepy in some manner. So, I'm excited for this one, and this the one that I found for mine is one that I never heard of. It's really hard to find. I know a lot of the paranormal-y ones, so it was nice to be able to find that. But that's enough about me because Autumn is going to go first this week.
This is true. This is true. Are you ready for me?
Well, I'm ready.
Buckle up, Buttercup.
Seatbelt fastened.
This is a very sad story.
Oh, great.
Happy days. So just kidding. This is definitely not happy days. But this is a story that I do think about often because it is extremely local. And I think it is an important one to tell.
I feel like Autumn always does cases where they're ones that she can't get off of her mind, like almost doing the podcast, like gets it at least out of her.
Mhm. Out of my mind and other people can and honestly, you'll hear this one. I feel like some people telling their stories helps them be remembered, and
That's true.
especially when their lives are so short, you feel like you want them to be remembered for a long time.
Yeah, and I think bringing attention to local cases is always nice too.
Very, very local. So, here I go deep diving in. And I don't know if you'll be familiar with this one, but you might be.
Find out.
This is also a solved case.
Yay!
It's my gift to you, my friend.
Thank you.
You're welcome. This is the murder of Rachel Burkheimer. There's something especially heartbreaking about a story where the people who should have cared about someone end up being the ones who take everything from them. And that's what happened to a 17-year-old girl from Everett, Washington. A bright, funny, loving young woman named Rachel Rose Burkheimer. She wasn't a mystery. She wasn't living a double life. She was just a teenager trying to figure out who she was, who she loved, and who she could trust. But one wrong turn, one complicated relationship, and one growing sense of jealousy would lead her straight into the hands of people she thought were her friends. Rachel was born in 1984 and grew up in the Everett area, part of a close, caring family. Her parents, Robert and Denise, adored her. She was the kind of daughter who made them laugh. She helped around the house, looked after her younger siblings, and could always be counted on to cheer someone up. She loved music, hip hop, R&B, anything she could dance to, and she had this creative streak too. She wrote poetry, short stories, little reflections about life that her family found later in her journals. She dreamed of studying fashion design one day, maybe even owning her own business. She loved to spend time with her friends. She was just 17, with the world still wide open in front of her, still growing into herself, still full of all the ordinary hopes that come with being young. But even with all that light, Rachel had started to drift into a world that wasn't good for her. A world of people who talked big about loyalty and power, but didn't really understand either one. And at the center of it was her ex boyfriend, John Anderson. Rachel and John had been together off and on since she was about 15. He was older, charming at first, but controlling. He wanted to know where she was, who she talked to, what she did. It was one of those relationships that starts out passionate, but quickly becomes all consuming.
Red flags.
Red flags. Friends said they fought often, that Rachel tried to hide how bad it got, that she wanted to see the good in him. But by 2002, Rachel was ready to move on, but John wasn't. That's really when the danger started. That summer, Rachel broke things off. She tried to pull away, to get back to being herself. But John wouldn't let it go. He became obsessed. He started talking to people about her, spreading rumors, watching her, trying to make her jealous. He started following her and calling her constantly, even showing up where she worked. John had fallen in with a group of young men, some friends, some hangers on, who called themselves the Crew. They liked to act like a gang, throwing around nicknames, talking about power and respect, but they were just kids, barely out of high school, caught up in some fantasy of being feared.
It's always so much worse when it's kids,
So
just
much
because they're
worse.
doing like a caricature of actual people's lives,
Mm,
or what they've portraying what they've seen on TV.
right. And they don't know the repercussions of their actions. They were kids, really, but the way they talked, the way they fed into each other's anger, it started to spiral. And somehow, in that mess of jealousy and posturing, Rachel became their enemy. On September 23rd, 2002, Rachel went over to a house in Linwood, Washington, where some of those guys were hanging out. Her friend and a guy who was part of the Crew, Maurice Rivas, had invited her. He said that the group wanted to talk things out, to clear the air, maybe even fix what had gone wrong. Rachel was cautious, but she was also kind. She didn't like holding grudges, so she went. She thought she was walking into a conversation. Instead, she walked right into a trap. John Anderson was there. So were Daniel Reuter, Michael Lyon, and John Whitaker. They accused Rachel of stealing from them, of knowing too much about their so called crew. All made up accusations designed to humiliate and control her. But the group fed off of each other's anger, and what started as talk became something darker. They locked Rachel in a garage. They took her phone, and then they tied her up. Over the next hours, Rachel was beaten, humiliated, and taunted, mostly by people she'd known for years. She begged them to let her go. At one point, she even managed to calm them down. Some of them wanted to stop, but John wouldn't allow it. Eventually, he told one of them, Tony Pineda, to dig a hole. They forced Rachel into the back of a duffel bag and loaded her into a car. They drove out toward Gold Bar into the woods. It was late, cold, and silent. There, John made her kneel in the shallow grave that Tony had dug. He raised a gun and shot her,
Oh my God.
execution style.
I was not expecting that.
I mean, he's
That's
a
terrible.
horrific. And they buried her body in the dirt. She was 17 years old. Rachel's family reported her missing the next day. They knew something was wrong immediately. She was responsible and she always checked in. For weeks, her family searched. Flyers went up all over Snohomish County, and her family pleaded for anyone who'd seen her to come forward. But the people who knew the truth, the crew, stayed quiet. They kept going to parties, hanging out, and pretending that nothing had happened. It wasn't until a few weeks later that one of them, Michael Lyon, finally broke.
Good.
He told investigators about the house in Linwood, the grave in the woods, and detectives found Rachel's body in early October,
The thing is
buried.
that kind of stuff will eat at your soul.
If I mean, it didn't seem to eat at most of these people's souls because they kept going
No,
to
but
parties, hanging out, and
at least
pretending that
one of
nothing had
them,
happened.
at least one of them had to step forward because they couldn't live with it.
Luckily, because no one else did. It was just him.
I mean, I would be scared if I just saw someone shoot someone and put them in a hole like that, and then I'd be scared to speak up.
I'm sorry, I have no sympathy for this boy. Even though he came up and spoke, I have no sympathy for any of these people that
Well, no,
participated
they
in
sat
this.
by and watched a girl get murdered.
Yes, it could all have been prevented. So
Yeah,
I
totally.
mean, I'm glad he said something so her family like was able to locate her body, but I go to hell. I'm so sorry, but go to hell. Um, they found Rachel's body in early October, buried just off a rural road outside of Gold Bar. The case that unfolded was one of the most chilling in Snohomish County history, not just because of the violence, but because of the betrayal. Everyone involved was so young, and everyone seemed to have had a chance to stop it. Everett isn't a big city. People knew her family, knew Rachel. They knew the boys who'd been arrested. It didn't seem possible that something so cruel could have come from a group of kids who grew up in the same place. Over the next few years, prosecutors worked through a web of trials and plea deals. John Anderson, Rachel's ex boyfriend, and the ringleader, was convicted of aggravated first degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. John Whitaker, who helped kidnap Rachel and was there during her murder, also received life without parole. Others, like Daniel Reuter and Maurice Rivas, took plea deals for their roles in the kidnapping and cover up. Each one told a version of the same story, that John was in control, that they were scared, and that they didn't mean for it to go so far. But it did. And for Rachel's family, those explanations never brought comfort. Through it all, her family refused to let Rachel's memory fade just into another crime headline. They spoke at every hearing. They started the Rachel Burkheimer Foundation, dedicated to helping young people recognize the warning signs of abusive relationships and to support families going through similar tragedies. Rachel's sister, Angela, once said that her sister had so much love in her heart, that she wanted to be remembered for her kindness, not the horror of her death. That Rachel was the kind of person who believed everyone deserved a second chance. And that's part of what makes her story so hard. She trusted people. She wanted to believe that goodness and that warmth is exactly how her family wants her to be remembered. And she has been. In the years since the foundation has awarded scholarships in Rachel's name, and her story has been told in schools, community centers, and youth programs across Washington. It's easy when you tell stories like this to get lost in the darkness and the cruelty of what people are capable of. But every time Rachel's story is shared, her life reaches a little further than what was taken from her. Her name still means something. Her story still saves others. And that's the other thing about remembrance. It's a kind of defiance. She's not just a headline or a case file. Rachel Rose Burkheimer was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She loved deeply, and she deserved to grow old.
Take your time.
And even though I'm sad, it's like my cousin
It's
knows this
okay.
girl, so it like makes me really sad.
Yeah. Just take a deep breath.
And even though her story ended in the woods near Gold Bar, her voice didn't. Because every person who says her name, every person who remembers her, her voice echoes a little louder than the people who tried to silence it. There's something powerful about remembrance. It can't under what it can't undo what happened, but it can make sure that someone like Rachel, someone who deserves so much more, isn't lost in the noise. If you or someone you know is in a controlling or abusive relationship, help is available. You can reach the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or chat at thehotline.org. Rachel's story is a reminder that love should never hurt and that kindness, even after tragedy, still matters. Because remembering her means she's still here in a way, still helping someone else find the strength to walk away. My sources were the Everett Herald, Washington Court Records, Fox 13 Seattle, and the Crime Podcast on YouTube.
That is really sad.
I just like it's senseless.
Completely, completely senseless. You can't make any sort of rationality here. She wasn't even with him anymore. She wasn't with the crew. It was just ridiculous, to be
He
honest.
just couldn't let her go. And it's like,
And we've seen this time after time.
yes, it's so tragic and so unnecessary. And the fact that these other young men were brought into it and
And
didn't stop it.
participated. They participated.
Yes, they
Whether or
didn't
not
stop
you
it.
pulled the trigger, you were still there, you still
Yes.
allowed it to happen, and there was a lot more of them than the one person who did it, right?
Mhm.
They allowed
1,000%.
that.
They allowed it. They tricked her. They knew what they were gonna do when she got there. I mean, the whole
Yeah.
thing was calculated.
No, it's so sad and sad for her family, and again, like you mentioned, for a young person to lose everything so early into their life.
It's just it's ugh, it just breaks my heart.
Yeah, that's a really tough one.
But
And
it's October, and that's around the time they found her, and I always think of her in October.
yeah. I don't I don't remember it. It sounds vaguely familiar. Like I think I remember uh just like
Probably seeing it on
warnings.
the news and stuff,
Yes,
yeah.
like news and like warnings and stuff, especially for young girls cuz she was right around our age. So, it's really sad.
So sad.
But I'm glad you did it.
Me too. She,
I
like,
know it was hard to get
deserves
through.
to be remembered.
Absolutely. So my case started from a ghost story and then becomes an actual murder case from that.
Okay.
I'm going to get right in this. My title of my case is Ghosts in the Cut. This ghost story doesn't come from around a campfire. It comes from an office file. a file stamped with a seal of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and a whisper about bodies buried in the dirt beneath a quiet hill in Malvern, Pennsylvania. But before that, before the records, before the bones and the forensics, this was just a story passed down from a grandfather to two young boys about ghosts that danced along the train tracks. They said that late at night near the woods behind Immaculata College, a strange mist rose from the ground, that within the fog lights appeared, green and blue, like pale fire flickering in the shapes of men. Railroad workers, he said, dead men, still trying to finish the job that killed them. That story stayed with those two boys for decades. And in time, they'd learned that their grandfather hadn't been telling them a tale. He'd been leaving them a message. The man who told that story was Joseph Trippishin. In life, he had been a quiet employee of the Pennsylvania Railroad, working in the administrative offices where the files were kept and history was, quite literally, written and buried. Trippishin worked for the railroad in the mid 20th century, and he was the kind of man who kept things: old letters, interoffice memos, documents marked internal use only. He filed away what others might have thrown out when the company was lost. And among these papers, the papers that would one day end up in the hands of his grandsons, Frank and Bill Watson, there was a folder. It was thin, bound in green string, and labeled Duffy's Cut. Inside were several typewritten pages, an internal railroad report from 1909 referencing an event from long before Trippishin's time. It describes the sketch of a railroad track, part of the main line west of Philadelphia near a town called Malvern. The report said that in 1832, while building that section of track, 57 Irish immigrant workers had died during a cholera outbreak. The bodies, it said, had been buried near the fill. That phrase, buried near the fill, would echo for years. According to the file, the men were laborers recently arrived from Ireland. They were poor, Catholic, and newly landed in a country that didn't particularly want them and let them know it. They had been hired by a contractor named Philip Duffy to carve a trench through hard Pennsylvania rock, and the cut that still bears his name today. Duffy's crew lived in shanties along the work site. Even though he himself was an Irish Catholic immigrant, he used his people. They were paid little and worked with pickaxes and shovels, and many of them slept in the open air. There was even a hierarchy to the Irish workers, and Protestants would get better jobs, and the Catholics would get the hardest work. When the cholera broke out in the summer of 1832, the Pennsylvania countryside went into panic. The disease killed swiftly, and fear spread faster than the infection. There were rumors that cholera specifically was spread by the Irish bringing it on the boats during their sea crossing to America, which also led to a lot of discrimination. The report claimed that all 57 of these men died of this disease and were buried in a mass grave beside the tracks. But what Trippishin's papers didn't say, what wasn't in the official record, were the stories that were passed down. Local legend claimed that not all of those men died of cholera. Some were killed and buried quickly and quietly where they fell. Trippishin never told anyone about the file, not the railroad, not the papers, not even his own children, but he did tell a ghost story. And when his grandsons grew up, they remembered it. Bill Watson became a historian. Frank Watson became a Lutheran minister. Both brothers shared a fascination with folklore, with lost history, and with the spaces where natural and supernatural blur together. And in 2002, when Bill came across that old folder in the box of his grandfather's belongings, he recognized the name instantly: Duffy's Cut. That was the place from the ghost story. And they read through the yellowed paper. The story that had once sounded like a myth began to look more like a cover up. The Duffy's Cut file wasn't long, just a few pages, but it referenced a company inquiry from 1832 and a later re examination by railroad officials in 1909. It also included a memo from a Pennsylvania railroad executive named Martin Clement, who decades later would become the company's president. In that memo, Clement wrote about the tragedy at Duffy's Cut and how 57 Irish laborers were buried where they were filling in the cut. He also added in his own hand, no one should disturb that place. For Bill and Frank, that note was the spark. They decided to find Duffy's Cut, not the modern railroad track that runs through Malvern, but the exact site of the workers' camp, the place their grandfathers said was haunted. It wasn't easy. Over decades, the landscape had changed. New developments, new roads, the widening of the main line corridor, the 19th century terrain was buried underneath brush and fill. But the brothers had clues. They had their grandfather's notes, a century old map, and the faint outline of a ridge just west of Immaculata University. They also found a memorial that was built in 1909 when an assistant supervisor of the Pennsylvania Railroad replaced a rotting wooden fence that had marked the mass grave of the Irish immigrants. The original marker was built in 1870 by sympathetic workers of the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad. When they first visited the site, the ground looked ordinary, a wooden slope beside a quiet residential road. But locals knew it by its name, Duffy's Cut, and they still whispered about it in Malvern. Teenagers told stories of lights in the woods, of spectral men walking along the embankment at night. Residents said you could even hear faint hammering, as if someone were still working underground. And sure enough, on a misty night in 2000, 2 years before they ever opened the file, Bill Watson himself remembered seeing something strange on that same hill. He was walking near an old rail line when he saw three figures ahead in the fog, glowing faintly green and blue like fireflies caught in human shape. He blinked and they vanished. He never told anyone, not wanting to sound foolish, but now, with the file in his hands and his grandfather's story echoing in his memory, the vision felt like a summons, a calling. What happened next was part folklore, part detective work, and ultimately forensics. The Watson brothers turned their grandfather's ghost story into a research project. They began with the archives of the Pennsylvania Railroad, searching for any mention of a cholera camp or workers' deaths in 1832. There were almost none. It was as if the railroad had intentionally erased the entire episode. But in a private company letter from 1832, they found a chilling line from a railroad supervisor. It said, "I cannot permit you to remove the bodies. They are buried where they are, and there they must stay." Bill later said was the moment he knew Duffy's Cuts was real, and it hid something darker than disease. By late 2003, Bill and Frank had assembled a small team. Historians, students, and archaeologists from the Immaculata University together began mapping the area. Old rail maps, property lines, and elevation contours, everything pointed to a wooden embankment just north of the active rail line. They began to dig. At first, they found nothing but stones and broken glass, but then in 2004, they uncovered the remains of a small clay pipe. It was carved with a harp, and it said the words, Erin go bra. It was an Irishman's pipe. It was the first physical evidence that they had found that Irish laborers had once lived on that ground. And over the next few years, the investigation continued. The brothers didn't announce their discovery right away. They wanted proof, real proof, that this wasn't just folklore. And in 2009, they got the break they were looking for. While digging near a spot, their radar showed an anomaly. The team struck something solid: wood, bone, and rusted nails. It was a coffin, and inside of it, human remains. The skeleton belonged to a man in his 20s. He was strong, well fed, and unmistakably Irish. But there was something else. The skull bore a fracture, a sharp depression on the side of the head that could not have been caused by disease. It was evidence of blunt force trauma. Within months, more remains surfaced, 6 in total, all male, all Irish, and all young. And several of them showed similar injuries, damaged skulls, axe marks, evidence of bullet wounds to their heads, broken bones, all signs of a violent death. The story of Duffy's Cut had now taken a grim turn. Official railroad records from 1832 claimed that all men died of cholera. And yes, there had been a cholera outbreak in Pennsylvania that summer. It killed hundreds across that region, but the epidemic alone didn't explain the violence. According to historians, local residents near Duffy's Cut were terrified of contagion. When the Irish workers fell ill, neighbors reportedly refused to help them. Nuns went to check on the sick, and because of the circumstances, they were made to walk alone for miles and miles in the summer heat because no one wanted to be around them. Some accounts say that vigilantes rode out to drive them away, or possibly worse. One early newspaper, the Village Record in Westchester, mentioned the cholera victims were buried near the line and warned travelers to avoid the site. But there's no mention of murder, no mention of gunfire or blunt weapons. Still, the bones had their own story. And the more that the Watson brothers uncovered, the clearer it became that the men at Duffy's Cut, not all of the victims, died from disease. Some met a very vicious end. The truth is, no one can say exactly what happened that summer, but the evidence suggests this. In June of 1832, 57 Irish immigrants arrived in Philadelphia aboard a ship called the John Stamp. They came from Derry, Donegal, and Tyrone. Young men seeking work and wages in the New World. We do know that the ship did go into a quarantine station when it reached Pennsylvania, and it was not reported that anyone aboard was ill. This was the height of the cholera outbreak, and they would have been very thorough. The immigrants were contracted by Philip Duffy to build a mile of track through the Pennsylvania hills. They cleared land, broke stone, and lived in a temporary camp along the site. But within weeks, cholera broke out, possibly brought by a contaminated water source. In the unforgiving heat of July and August, the workers would have taken drinks from small streams. Cholera is a bacterial infection that spreads due to poor sanitary practices in which human feces gets into drinking water via excrement passed into streams or by seepage from outhouses to wells. Cholera causes extreme diarrhea and vomiting that leads to rapid electrolyte loss. In 1832, it was fatal in at least 50% of cases. The hardest hit areas in the region were the working class neighborhoods, canals, and railroad work camps. It spread fast, and it is estimated that over 10,000 people died from cholera just during the 1832 epidemic. Frightened locals fearing infection refused them aid. When they tried to seek help, they were turned away. At some point, according to a later account and forensic evidence, violence erupted, whether by vigilantes or by the very men who had hired them. Several workers had been beaten and shot. Their bodies were dumped in a trench. The rest of the dead, from illness or fear, were buried with them. Then over time, the earth was filled in, the tracks were laid, and a ghost story began. When Bill and Frank Watson uncovered the Duffy's Cut file, they also uncovered a century of silence. The railroad had known, at least some of its officials had known that this grave existed, and instead of acknowledging it, they folded it into myth. One company memo from 1909 even described the site as a place of danger and superstition, warning employees not to trespass. And that's what the community did for nearly 200 years. They stayed away, but the ghosts didn't. Because some stories, no matter how long they're buried, find a way to be heard. When Bill and Frank Watson found those first bones in the summer of 2009, they knew the story had changed. Their father's ghost tale is now a crime scene. A century and three quarters after those Irish laborers had been buried in secret, their bodies were coming to light, and they were telling a different story than the Pennsylvania Railroad ever had. Forensic experts from the Pennsylvania State University joined the project. Under the direction of Dr. Janet Monge, a physical anthropologist from the University of Pennsylvania, the remains were carefully examined. 6 sets of human bones were confirmed to be all males, most in their early 20s, with an average height of 5.5 feet. Analysis of the remains discovered in Duffy's cut between 2009 and 2012 indicates that all 6 workers were murdered. Forensic examinations show that they had been struck about the head, and the absence of defensive wounds suggests that they were bound beforehand. One man, the only one who was over 6 foot, was known as the Tall Man. He was felled by an axe blow to the back of the head,
Oh my
then,
God.
then he was shot dead. The violence is believed to reflect an anti Irish, anti Catholic hostility and tensions over the competition of work in the region, as well as an attempt to contain the spread of cholera. Several showed evidence of bullet holes, small circular punctures near their cranial suture, clear as day under a microscope to be bullet holes. Others bore fractures that couldn't have been caused by the collapse of Earth or by disease. Cholera kills quickly, but it does not break bones. The other odd thing is that the coffins had over 100 nails in each of them, which is well over a standard amount. Clearly, they did not want these opened again. The evidence confirmed what the Watson brothers had long suspected. Not all of the men in Duffy's cut had died of illness. Some had been murdered, likely to contain the spread of disease or to silence witnesses, or simply because they were poor Irish Catholics in the wrong place at the wrong time. As the forensic team worked, they began to piece together fragments of lives that had been erased. Buttons from wool coats, bits of clay pipes carved by their owners, nails from handmade boots, and one haunting artifact, a small porcelain pipe bowl carved with the face of a young man grinning, an image thought to represent the musician Daniel O'Connell, a hero of Irish independence, and it had survived nearly 2 centuries underground. It seemed to smile up through the dirt as if to say, "You found me." By this point, the story had drawn attention. Local newspapers began to cover the excavation, calling it the Cut Mystery. National Geographic arrived, and then the BBC. The story resonated especially in Ireland, where the men had come from. For generations, the descendants of Irish immigrants had told stories about family members who had vanished after leaving home. Now, for the first time, the world was seeing what might have become of them. The ship's manifest for the John Stamp, which docked in Philadelphia in June of 1832, listed 57 Irish laborers bound to work for the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad. Names like John Ruddy, James Devine, Patrick Quinn, Michael Doyle, all young men from Donegal, Derry, and Tyrone. They were poor, but they were hopeful. This was supposed to help build them a future. Instead, they became ghosts in the ground. It took years for the excavation to reach its full scope. The hill where the camp had once stood tangled with roots and vines, and the Watsons team could only dig small sections at that time. But each new layer revealed more evidence: coffin fragments, rusted nails, bone shards. Archaeologists' notes from the site described the soil as a mosaic of clay and ash, suggesting that the camp may have been burned down after the men died. Some oral traditions even hinted at that the shanties were set ablaze to disinfect the area or to hide what happened there. It's hard to know what is true. But what we do know is after the tragedy, the railroad pressed on. Tracks were laid right over the burial ground, sealing the dead beneath the progress of industry. For the company, it was business as usual. For the men that were buried there, silence. When the forensic reports came back, they shocked even seasoned researchers. Out of the 6 skeletons recovered, 4 showed direct signs of violence. Dr. Monge told reporters in 2010, it's very clear that they were not cholera victims. The discovery forced historians to reevaluate the narrative of 1832. Yes, there was cholera, but prejudice, fierce, anti Irish, anti immigrant sentiment was rampant. The Irish Catholics were often seen as dirty, drunken, and contagious. Some scholars believed that local residents and perhaps even the railroad itself decided to contain the problem by killing the workers and burying them quickly. Others argue that the men may have been shot by a vigilante mob as they fled their quarantined camp. Still, others suggest that railroad workers, desperate to keep the project on schedule, covered up the deaths to avoid scandal and keep moving. No matter the motive, the result was the same. Out of the 57 men who disappeared, only 6 had been found. One of the most powerful moments in the Duffy's Cut story came in 2013, when forensic tests helped identify the first of those men by name. His name was John Ruddy. He was about 18 years old when he sailed from County Donegal to America. Records from the John stamp listed John Ruddy as traveling with his family, perhaps his cousins, all bound for work on the railroad. His skeleton remains were matched through DNA testing with living Irish descendants, confirming his identity after nearly 2 centuries. John Ruddy's remains were placed in a wooden coffin draped with the Irish flag and flown home to Donegal. There, in a quiet ceremony, he was buried under a Celtic cross at last, with his name restored. The Watson brothers attended. They said it felt like the closing of a circle. Then in 2015, 3 years later, another victim was identified as 29-year-old widow Catherine Burns. She received a traditional Irish wake and funeral mass in her native County Tyrone, where she was reinterred. After the death of her husband, Catherine, her father-in-law, John Burns, and a dozen others from County Tyrone left Ireland aboard the John stamp, hoping for a better life in the New World. A forensic examination of her skull indicated that she also suffered a violent death by means of a sharp implement. But not all of the victims could be returned. The remaining bodies were reinterred near the site of the original camp in 2012, beneath a granite memorial engraved with the words, "To the memory of the 57 Irishmen who lost their lives at Duffy's Cut, June through August 1832. May they rest in peace." The ceremony drew descendants, clergy, students, and locals. Bagpipes played in the autumn air. As the caskets were lowered into the ground, a train passed on the nearby tracks, its whistle echoing through the trees. Today, Duffy's Cut sits just beyond the quiet residential street, fenced off, its soil still concealing the rest of the dead. The excavation stopped in 2012, partly due to funding and partly because the remaining graves are thought to lie beneath an active railroad property. The Pennsylvania Railroad's modern successor was Amtrak, and they restricted access to that area. So the rest of the 57 remain underground, unnamed, uncounted, and unquiet. Visitors still report strange lights along the tree line. Even police officers patrolling the area late at night have described seeing misty figures moving among the trees. The Watson brothers themselves say that on more than one occasion they felt the air shift, a sudden cold, a sense of being watched. Whether those experiences are supernatural or psychological doesn't really matter, because the ghosts of Duffy's Cut are real. even if they're made of memory and guilt instead of mist and flame. The story of Duffy's Cut is one of those rare pieces of history that started as a ghost story and ended as an investigation. And it reminds us that folklore often grows from facts, that whispers can sometimes be evidence. What began as a grandfather's tale of strange lights in the woods became a forensic excavation, an international news story, and a reckoning with a violent history of American labor. And even now, more than a decade later, researchers hope that further digging, if ever allowed, will reveal the rest of the 57. And I have an update.
Tell me.
In April 2025, not that long ago, the remains believed to have belonged to a railroad crew of up to 120 men are now understood to be directly connected to the Duffy's Cut site. This new discovery comes 19 years after the Watson brothers and their team had uncovered the story of the mass grave of the 57 Irish immigrants. According to William Watson, evidence now suggests a broader tragedy. That cholera may have spread from one crew to another, carried by a single infected worker traveling from mile 59 in Malvern to mile 48 in Downington. They believe that the Downington grave may hold an entire vanished work crew of between 100 to 120 people that disappeared from the historical record, along with their Irish-born contractor, Peter Connor. The newly discovered mass grave could also possibly include the remains of a man who fled from the cholera quarantine at Duffy's Cut, perhaps carrying the infection with him to Downington. At the time, the Westchester newspaper reported that they knew a man from Duffy's Cut escaped westward along the unfinished track to another Irish immigrant railroader crew near the line of East Bradford. The first set of human remains at the Downington gravesite was found in May by a geophysicist and archaeologist, Matt Peace, on land owned by the Northwood Cemetery. Initial skeletal findings included fragments of jaws and teeth. DNA testing is expected to help identify any living descents or relations to those buried, hoping to add closure to so many. As for the Watson brothers, Bill and Frank still teach, still research, and still speak out about Duffy's Cut. Every year they visit the memorial, and every time they remember the man who started it all, their grandfather, Joseph Tripashin, who told them about the lights on the hill. The dead at Duffy's Cut have been silent a long time, but silence doesn't always last forever. It shifts, it rises, and sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear the hammering of the rails and the ghosts of the 57 men still working, still waiting in the cut. My sources were the TV show Secrets of the Underground, articles by Hidden City, the National Geographic News, History Press, the University of Pennsylvania Museum Reports, the Village Record Archival Reports, August 1832, the Pennsylvania Railroad Internal Correspondence, BBC News Northern, and the Immaculata University Devil's Cut Project Archives. And I think that this case reminds us all about how this country was built by immigrants, granted on stolen land, but never forget who built this country.
Wow.
Yeah. And right around the time of this case, this is just a fun fact. Right around the time of this case, my 3 times great grandfather, who was born in Cootahill, Cavan, Ireland, in 1834, immigrated to America when he was 10 years old, coming through New York. He traveled through Maine, then went to Port Gamble, Washington, to work for Puget Sound Milk Company. And by the time he got to Seattle, he was a prominent figure and had built himself a mass of wealth, did not trickle down, and he was elected Seattle's 4th mayor.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's
That's
kind
a
of
cool little
crazy.
connection.
And my name is Erin, which obviously means Ireland, but my mom had no clue that I was Irish on my dad's side. So It's just a happy
Oh, the
accident.
irony.
Yeah. But it's kind of crazy to think that only 10 years after these people all came across, my grandfather immigrated to America from Ireland. So a little bit of a connection with that side of things. I think that those people that were murdered because they were trying to prevent them from either running away, or because they were worried they had cholera. I think it was an
Mhm.
anti-Irish, anti-Catholic, or
Right.
just to prevent the cholera outbreak.
I agree.
Whether they were infected or not, they were going to
Right.
kill everybody.
So, because maybe they thought it would stop the spread, but it was very violent.
Oh my god, an axe to the head? They said that believe that that guy had it worse just because he was bigger than everybody else. Yeah, because the average height was 5.5 feet.
Right, he was
So,
the tall guy.
he was the tall man. But it's crazy that this all started because of a ghost story, and then these 2 guys just took off with it, and now they've uncovered 2 mass graves within miles of each other. One that can contain somewhere around 120 people.
Just so crazy.
And then they built the railroad over the rest of them. It's just wild to me.
Mhm.
At one point, they did think that the railroad was trying to move the bodies from the mass grave for building, but instead they decided, "Nah, let's just keep them there." But there was all these notes that were like, "Do not move them. This is be careful. It's a superstitious place. You've been warned. Don't go there." It's kind of crazy. But
And they're like, "Okay."
they're like, "Cool, let's just, build a railroad over their bodies, I guess."
Right?
I think it's pretty incredible, though, that they're able to match DNA to these bodies that they're finding, and they're able to, show people in there that are Irish
Yeah,
descendants that,
I agree.
"Hey, we found you. We found your descendant." Imagine getting a phone call sitting in Ireland and getting a phone call saying, "Hey, we found your 200-year-old grandparent," or
They
cousin
didn't
or
abandon
whatever.
you, they were murdered.
I mean, that's the thing, once they immigrated, they lost touch of whatever happened to them when they came to America. Imagine if you were back then, they just disappeared. They went to
Mhm.
another country and you never heard from them again.
Never again.
So, it's kind of cool that they have brought back 2 of the bodies to Ireland to be reinterned with their families. Pretty incredible. But that is my case this week.
I liked it. I liked it.
Yeah. So we will be back next week with another episode. And again, I will have some spooky connection, whether it be ghost or witch or whatever, for October. So we will be back again. Tell your friends to listen to our podcast.
Tell everyone.
Tell
Even if you're not
everyone.
friends with them, just tell them.
Just spread the word.
Yeah,
That's
just be like,
all.
"Listen to Erin Autumn at Murder Not Murdering."
That's what it is. And check out our Instagram page where we will be showing pictures from both of our cases.
Yes.
And I will have pictures of the findings that they had.
That's
It's
exciting.
very cool. I 10 out of 10 recommend to check it out. And that's at Murder Not Murdering on Instagram. So, and then we are also on TikTok at
Dot
mnn.pod.
pod.
So make sure to check that out and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.